The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host, guest, random reptoid, or chupacabra may not necessarily reflect those of AM 950 Radio, its affiliates, or its sponsors. Now, it's time to step into the unknown. The best of GhostBox Radio with Greg Bakun.
This is the best of GhostBox Radio with Greg Bakun on AM 950. Tonight we're going to play parts of interviews from 3 different guests. We've had some amazing people appear on the show, and we think that they should be heard from again. Enjoy the show. My special guest tonight is Miss Echo Bodine. Does everything, and she is the host of Enough is Enough on Bold Brave TV, psychic medium, Ghostbuster, as you call it. I find, I have to admit, I don't hear the term Ghostbuster all that much. I like hearing that. Was that around before the movie came out? Were you all using that before the movie came out?
No, honey. No.
It came out after. Yeah.
No, we would just get calls from people. I think I have a ghost in my house. Okay. And we'd just say, we got a ghost job. We never called it that. And then when the movie came out, I remember one night, I looked over at my brother. We were driving to a ghost job, and I said, "Bro, we're Ghostbusters." And we just thought that was so funny because how do you bust a ghost? Really?
Right. But you ain't afraid of no ghost. So
no,
that's...
Well, you know what, honey? I got to tell you the truth. I'm kind of a scaredy cat a little bit because you never know what you're going to find.
No,
and
you don't.
We always, when we walk through a house, we usually have all the lights off. Because it's easier to see them that way. At least it is for me. And, they're like a white, hazy form. And so in the dark, it's like, oh, yeah, there we go. And, but walking around in the dark, it's proven to be kind of scary sometimes. And, oh, my God. I've gotten a lot better about it, and I'm fine about it in the daytime. It's just when it's dark out and we're walking through a big factory or something and it's dark, then I can get freaked out. But
absolutely. Do you want to? Because a couple things I want to do here. Because we're definitely going to talk about the Center for Intuitive Living. But do you want to take some questions?
Sure, honey.
Let's do. Sure. Okay, let's do this. Paula says, or asks, wondering as far as reincarnation, do we start all over spiritually as well?
You mean in our next life?
That's how I take it, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's a really good question, Paula. I wouldn't think so.
Because that's part of the journey, right?
Yes, yeah. So, I mean, think of all the other things we bring with us from other lifetimes. A lot of us bring fear, the different ways that we've died in previous lives. And if there's still an emotional attachment to one of those deaths, then we'll bring that with us into our new life to get resolved. But Paula, that's a really good question, honey.
It is a really good question, and I mean, because it does feel like that everything that we are doing is because I've always kind of thought of it as we pass on and we have like a bit of a kind of a meeting, if you will, about what do we want to achieve this next time and what do we need to do, right? And,
yeah.
Very cool. Carol didn't have a question, more of a wonderful comment. She says, I've been so privileged to go see you before at one of your talks. You are so beautiful and inspiring. You answered so many questions people were asking. That's really nice.
Oh, honey, thank you, Carol. Yeah. That's a very nice thing to say.
Yeah, they don't talk about me that way, but that's fine.
That's not right.
Because I'm too nice. I'm not like enough is enough. So let's see here.
You never get to the point where you're like, enough is enough.
Minute by minute, to be fair, to be very honest. I mean, I just,
Okay.
yeah, no, trust me, that was not true. Minute by minute, every. I mean, if a cat can make you angry, I mean, obviously you're going to, but he's a special case. He really is.
Okay, I understand.
Yeah, he's actually tries to kill me. I'm going to post video someday of me walking down the stairs and have it to the ground where you're going to see him literally put his paw out as you're trying to go down the stairs as he tries to trip me. He puts his paw out.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, no, it's serious, I mean. He's like the cutest monster you could ever imagine. But anyway, let's get back to more important things. Julie asks, do you work in other dimensions in any capacity? That's a great question.
Well, Julie. Well, yes, honey. Oh, my goodness. Yes. Most of my life, I'm half here in my body on the earth, living a regular life like everybody else. But there's the other half of me that's always on the other side, communicating with the other side or communicating with aliens. I've done that also. Yeah, honey, I communicate with the deceased almost as much as I communicate with the living. So, yeah, I'm kind of in between both worlds most of the time.
And I would think that that sometimes with people, that's a harder concept for people to understand, the dimensional side, right? And it has to be, part of me thinks that it has to be kind of difficult to try to explain, but once they get it, that has to be pretty rewarding too.
Yeah, it is. It can be. It's, like, oh boy, I tell you, people have such different opinions about psychics or what we can do or can't do. And it is tough to explain, like really, Greg, in the summertime, I spend most of my time outside and I have little gardens all over my yard. And when I'm out there, Spirit talks to me a lot. When Spirit talks to me a lot, other than a shower, is when I'm mowing the grass. Yeah. They'll just come and start talking to me. And what's hard for me is that maybe a neighbor will come over to talk, and it's like it pulls me out of that dimension, brings me back to this dimension. But for a second usually, or longer than a second, I get confused on, okay, what? And I have gotten better about telling my neighbor, you know what, I'm talking to my invisible friends right now. And she's like, oh, okay. But honey, as you know, we can't talk to people like this.
No.
You're an everyday person. Yep. We can't. So it can be challenging. But I guess I have to say it's been that challenge has been there my whole life. Being in another dimension than feeling pulled to come back to this dimension. That
makes, I once knew a medium who had said that she always thought a great time to talking with spirit would be exactly kind of what you're saying about you're mowing the lawn, you're doing dishes, you're doing something, but your mind is available to just kind of let that happen on its own.
Yes.
But receive the messages coming through.
Yes. Honey, I agree. Totally. Oh God, totally. Totally. Yes. And you're right. I think it's when I'm doing mundane things that I could do in my sleep, and then they come and start chatting with me. So, yeah.
And I mean, I suppose in a way that would be a great opportunity for those who want to experience talking with spirit, but maybe haven't. Try to be available during something like that, perhaps.
Yes. Yeah. I know when I haven't been doing readings for about a year, and I know when I did do readings, and I would sit down and I would, you got to ground yourself, you got to clear yourself, and then just open up to the other side. The thing about it is that to people who are going to a psychic, we look like we're just sitting there, just sitting there. And there's so much going on, trying to ground ourselves and then trying to open up psychically and go to a different level. And, because a lot of people want to know, my husband just died, my wife just died, is she okay? Okay, so that means I need to go through this. Honey, really, it's like steps. And then you get yourself to a high level vibrationally. See, I even hate to talk like that, but it's almost like you have to lighten yourself up, and then you can communicate to that side. And, that's also too, my clients, people that were my regulars, they knew, don't talk to me when I'm trying to get to that level, or even during the reading. People, and this might be good for people to know, that when a psychic is trying to work for you, we are trying to connect to the different levels. And it's best if you don't talk to us during the session. Yep. When the psychic, or at least when I was there on the other dimension, I had kind of shut down this dimension. Then I would say to the clients, okay, do you have questions? So it's like I pulled myself back here so I can hear their questions. Yep. Okay. And then I can go back up. So that used to be so distracting for me when people would start talking about something that I just said. And gosh, Greg, I would just be like, wait, no. And then, okay. And then start over and work my way back to that other dimension.
That makes sense. It also feels like it's not only is it interfering in your concentration, but it's also, whether you want it or not, I would assume there's always kind of a fear of leading as well. Then it's like they're putting something in your mind that you're just like, no, let me focus on what I'm supposed to tell you. Don't
Yes. Right? Yes. Yeah.
No, I totally get it. And if I were a medium, I've said this to other people, because I've been to enough psychic fairs, I've had enough tables at different places, that I've heard this, and it just makes me cringe. And I don't know what other people think about this, but I would hate to be asked the question of, when am I going to die?
Oh, honey, you know what? Now, maybe you can explain this one to me. Honest to God, I would say 95% of the population over the last, 54 years, when they say to me, oh, what do you do for a living? Oh, I'm a psychic, Oh, don't tell me when I'm going to die. Honey, why is that the first thing they always think? Do you know?
I think it's interesting, because I feel like, and I'm not trying to make anyone angry with these sort of things I'm going to say here. I feel like the more people are into organized religion, and this is just my opinion, folks, just my opinion, the more they fear death. The more people are into spiritualism, the more that they are okay with, they feel like that they know the next steps.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that we're welcoming it. Doesn't mean like I'm on top of the building of this, of here and going, take me, but it's like I don't fear it. My parents have passed. I've heard from them. I know it's fine. If I were a medium, I think I would. If someone asked me, "Do you know when I'm going to die?" I'd probably just look at my clock and go, "What time is it now?" You know what I mean?
Oh my God! Oh my goodness! Honey, when I say to somebody, "Hi, how are you?" Why? What do you know? Okay, I mean, no, it's just a question. I'm just asking a question. I just want to know how you are. But it makes them really nervous.
Yeah.
That a psychic is saying, "Hi, how are you?" I can't tell you how many people say that to me. Why? What do you know? I don't know anything. That's why I'm asking.
They think, and I do hear that sometimes messages come. We all do have some intuitive abilities. I certainly have embraced mine a lot more over the past number of years.
Good.
But the idea of people thinking that random things just come to you. And I know it can, but
Yeah,
it's not all the time. It's not like you see somebody and you're just like, cut down on the salt, You are listening to the best of GhostBox Radio with Greg Bakun. Remember, you can hear full past episodes, see upcoming events, and order books of the authors we have on the show by going to ghostboxradio.com. Don't forget to like us over on Facebook, look us up at GhostBox Radio with Greg Bakun, and finally, please consider supporting me on Patreon. We have a special, unique audio content that you'll not find anywhere else, plus special episodes. On Patreon, you can find me as GhostBox Radio with Greg Bakun. We'll be back with another guest after the break. You're listening to GhostBox Radio on AM 950.
The best of GhostBox Radio with Greg Bakun.
Today, we're talking with a hospice caregiver who prefers to remain anonymous. We are talking about hospice hauntings and other medical locations, spirit encounters, and when the soul leaves the body. I do have a couple questions. Well, I have a lot of questions that have come through. Do you mind taking some of them?
That's fine.
Okay. So let me start with this. Lisa on Facebook, and folks, you can also call in 952-946-6205 if you like. Don't be shy. But Lisa asks, is it common for those who are in hospice to experience visits by loved ones who had previously passed? Did you ever encounter one of your clients telling you of past loved ones experiencing that? So you did kind of answer that. Well, I mean, I don't know if Jesus was related to him, but what did that question make sense? Did I brutalize that? Okay.
Yeah, almost every patient that I've had, if they're verbal at the end, has told me that loved ones come to get them. Usually, we've gotten to where we'll ask if they've seen their mom and dad yet, because it's common for people to see their parents. And a lot of them will talk to them a long time before. So a week or so leading up to their death, they will talk about different loved ones that have passed on before them coming to visit and talking to them or telling them they're getting ready to go home.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
The patients usually say, I'm getting ready to go home. I just got to go. Mom has been here. We get that a lot. Usually it's mom and dad that you get. And I've had some people say their brother has come or their sister has come, but generally it's mom and dad seem to come and get them.
It's really interesting because, I didn't have a lot of experience in that area, and just really more with my mom. My dad passed suddenly. So what you're saying really mirrors what I ran into before mom started she stopped being communicative with us because it just did took her over, and she laid basically in a coma for about a week before she passed. But, some of her last lucid days were the same sort of thing. I want to go home. She'd always also say green, green grass of home. And so that is really very interesting. Tara had asked if apart from the sighting from like Jesus, have you heard of anyone seeing angels or anything?
Yeah, and that's funny she says that, because that's another thing. My best friend, she works in hospice too, and she had taught me that part of our job was to find out how close somebody was to dying so that they wouldn't die alone. So she said, well, I always ask them if they've seen the angels yet. And so I kind of adopted that into what I would ask patients when I go in. Have you seen the angels yet? Has your parents came to visit you? And we would kind of use that as a judge. People that hadn't seen their parents yet or hadn't seen the angels, we kind of knew that they had a little bit more time. But one time I went in and I asked them, have you seen the angels yet? And the patient said, yes. I'm like, oh, are they coming to take you home? She's like, no, they came in with you.
Wow.
I said, they came in with me. She's like, yeah, they came in with you. And I'm like, oh, are they coming to visit you? They just came with me. And she's like, no, they're with you.
Oh, wow. Oh, interesting.
I was kind of panicked, but my best friend, she was like, well, maybe that's why we don't have car wrecks or anything bad happen to us, because the angels travel with us.
Right, exactly. Well, here's a question. I was going to say, here's a question. And Adam, do you mind if I bring you in on this part of it?
Go right ahead.
Because you had talked to me a little bit earlier about, if you don't mind, about some of your experience, and that there was something that when you volunteered, something always would happen that would kind of signal that someone was going to pass, right?
So, yeah, my mother used to work at a facility for mentally challenged children, and they would be there, a lot of them from birth all the way up to death. Most of the time they would, die within their 20s and 30s, so you had folks that were there 20, 30 years. But the weird thing was, every time there would be deaths, they would always come in threes where my mom would work.
Mm-hmm.
But the most telling signal that someone or the groups were about to start going, they would be in what was called a day room or a feeding room. And there'd be about 4 to 5 of the nurses or QMAs in there feeding 15 to 20 of the children that were in the facility. And they would have it on, let's say, the pop rock station, if you will. All of a sudden, the station would turn by itself and Conway Twitty would be on. Now, rewind that a little bit. One of the first patients that was at this facility was actually a big Conway Twitty fan. Actually, they would listen to it all the time, and it was one of the first people who passed at the facility after it had opened in 1978. So from there on out, through the existence of at least my mom working there through 96 and me volunteering there through 1999, whenever all of a sudden Conway Twitty would start going, you knew you were about to lose 3 of those wonderful patients.
And so we also were talking about another place that's attached to a haunted location called Asylum 49 that had a nursery home attached to it, and it was said there that there'd be a little girl seen every time before they knew someone was going to pass. They would see a little girl. I've also heard similar things about like a cat, so that someone would see a cat. This is probably the longest way we've ever asked a question by having guest speakers about it. But do you ever run into anything like that in your experiences? Like there was something that always happened that kind of was the prelude of a loss of life?
Not in hospice, but when I worked in long-term care, we had the residents would start, like, you knew someone was going to pass away because they'd start trying to hoard their food. They would take it to their rooms. You couldn't take their tray out. They would have a fit and they'd be restless. And when you asked them, you try to take the food, they'd be like, no, we got to feed the little girl. And they all seen this little girl. And so you knew if someone saw the little girl, they were going to die. And you just didn't know how long it would be. Sometimes it was a week. Sometimes it was a couple of days. But the call lights would go crazy on the night that they would be passing. Like the patients would all be on their call lights, all very antsy and restless. And then the patient would die that night. My grandmother, who was she retired and became a CNA, which is not what people generally do.
Yeah.
But that's what she did. And I was telling her about it, and she told me, oh, yeah, that always happens. She said that they know death is coming, but they don't know who it's coming for, and that's why all the patients are restless and on their call light. But I witnessed it, and several nurses, like I even said in report one time that a patient was hoarding their food for the little girl, and they're like, oh, she's going to die. And that was before I had witnessed it. And then sure enough, she did pass.
Wow.
So, I mean, I think that kind of stuff happens everywhere. It's strange that other places you hear about the little girl. It's not just that one facility that I was
Got the
in.
chills like nobody's business. Wow. And I have to say, one of the comments that I keep seeing all over the place is how beautiful these stories are. And I always think to myself, that's what paranormal is to me. It's not about the scary stuff we see on TV. To me, it's all about these beautiful stories because it personally gives me hope. You said that you weren't into the paranormal when you started doing these jobs. How does that make you feel about the afterlife, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, I mean, I definitely am more hopeful about it now. I mean, you just, as you're living, you just don't know what to expect or that there's anything to expect. Obviously, in religion, where we learn there's heaven and hell. but it's nice to have, I guess, proof. And seeing how people pass peacefully, it gives you proof that there's something else out there.
Right. Now, this segment is a little bit longer. So do you want to share something that you can take your time and walk through and tell us some of the more experiences that you have, please?
Well, I guess we could kind of talk about when I was working in psych. A little background on the psychiatric facility I worked for. It was built in the late 1800s, back when psychiatric care wasn't what it is today. Mm-hmm. Patients did go there, and they lived there, and they died there, and they were treated with lobotomies and straitjackets, and they had a tuberculosis unit because tuberculosis hit really big, and people died of that. So the facility that I worked in, I can't even tell you how many thousands of people had probably died there.
Yeah.
I was working in a unit that was kind of a mixture of psychiatric illnesses, from schizophrenia to bipolar to different personality disorders. And I had a patient that relentlessly kept telling me, there are bodies under this building. And I said, there is not bodies under this building. There's no way they would do that. I just knew that person was hallucinating that. They would tell me that the spirits were there. So I had mentioned it to one of the senior trainers in the building that trained all the nurses that came through. And she's like, oh yeah, there is bodies underneath that building. I said, oh my gosh, this patient just told me this. She's like, yeah, back when they built the building, they were too cheap to move the cemetery. That those patients didn't really have families, that none of the headstones have names on it. That's just a number. And to them, those bodies were just numbers. So they just moved the headstones and built the building on top. She's like, you'll notice that our cemetery, the headstones are perfectly in line because there's no bodies underneath them. They just put them there. And so I think that patient was probably seeing the spirits that were unhappy that their bodies were not moved, that our building was literally built on top. I don't know how else that patient would have known, because it wasn't really public knowledge.
So
it was the truth.
Wow. So this other cemetery with the tombstones that are, it's just like a little, it's kind of like, we know that there's bodies nearby, so here's a fake one. They kind of give the impression that this is where they really are. Is that kind of what that is?
Yeah, like almost like they just moved the headstones, like that was the memorial of that person, and they just moved the headstones. You can go to the facility and pull a book and look up the number, and it'll tell you the person's name and the age that they died and what they died of. But the headstone itself says like A21 or whatever the letter and the number is, and that was to coordinate with the building that they were in. And I don't know if the number is like what number death the person was that had died in that building.
Annette had put a question into the chat that she was curious, had any of your patients ever come back as spirits and thank you in any way, such as maybe a symbol or something that made you think that was them and that they were just at least letting you know that they were around?
You know, I wish that had happened to me. It hasn't yet. But I'm still fairly new in the career, so maybe by the time I'm out of hospice, something like that will happen.
I'm going through all the stuff that you had sent over to me. You had talked about one that was not as peaceful, that I thought was really, really interesting. Yeah.
The guy that I took care of, he was a convicted killer on hospice. He had been discharged from prison to come home and die. He really didn't have family. I think that the family that took him in really didn't want to, but they felt obligated to have him. They did not want to be present when he died. So we were sitting with him, and he had been comatose pretty much the entire time I had been there. I was not by any means afraid of him, but as he died, he sat straight up in bed and with a look of horror in his face screamed at the top of his lungs, as he died. And it was like something bad had come to collect him. The way he looked, I've never seen anyone scream and look as scared as he did.
Because he looked at something in particular, right? Like the corner or something, right?
Yeah, the corner of the room, like something had came in.
Well, if that doesn't give you nightmares, I'm not sure what does. I mean,
it was really scary. I called an aide to come be with me until the coroner came, because I did not even want to be alone with his body. Because whatever had came, I did not want to be there by myself.
It's like, that doesn't sound like Jesus. But then again, maybe it is Jesus, you know what I mean? But, you know, I mean, it's just, what a incredible situation, and that you've not seen anything like that since, right?
No, I haven't. That's the only time, and I hope I never have to again.
Well, and that's the thing about it too, right? That it's not like it was somebody who just was living a life and then suddenly they had just had this massive moment. It was somebody who is a convicted killer. And you know, the questions that come to my mind, which I'm not asking you, I know you can't answer these,
okay.
but the questions that come to my mind is like, was this like last minute guilt, like that you know, you getting right, or was it truly something that was just like, this is what's going to happen to you? I mean, what a crazy yeah.
I would think it was last minute guilt if he hadn't been so peaceful right before that.
You are listening to the best of GhostBox Radio with Greg Bakun. Remember, you can hear full past episodes, see upcoming events, and order books of the authors we have on the show by going to ghostboxradio.com. Don't forget to like us over on Facebook, look us up at GhostBox Radio with Greg Bakun, and finally, please consider supporting me on Patreon. We have a special, unique audio content that you'll not find anywhere else, plus special episodes. On Patreon, you can find me as GhostBox Radio with Greg Bakun. We'll be back with another guest after the break. You're listening to GhostBox Radio on AM 950.
The best of GhostBox Radio with Greg Bakun.
Our guest today is Dr. Whitny Braun, whose Discovery Plus documentary, The Lost Lincoln, looks at what could be the unknown lost deathbed photo of President Lincoln. Boy, like I said at the start of the show, this has been very fascinating for me. It's you know, Dr. Braun, as you said about how that image kept in your mind. I mean, I have to say, it's kind of been the same thing for me. I've been kind of obsessed with it because it's so many variables to it. How did we get to the point of being able to link it back to the Peterson boarding house in April of 1865?
Sure, it's a fantastic question, and so basically, the linchpin in this whole story is a guy named George Valentine Rutherford, and so the story that was presented to me when I first saw the image was that the picture had come out of the estate of Margaret Hanks. Mm-hmm. Now, Margaret Hanks, same last name as, you know, Tom Hanks, and maybe people don't know that Tom Hanks is actually distantly related to Abraham Lincoln, but Hanks was Lincoln's mother's family name. And so the fact that it had come out of the estate of Margaret Hanks, like, starts to pique the curiosity. And Margaret Hanks' grandfather, Joseph Hanks, was neighbors and good friends with George Valentine Rutherford. And you might go, well, who the heck was George Valentine Rutherford? Why should I care about that? George Valentine Rutherford was the quartermaster, the officer in the quartermaster corps that was assigned to guard Lincoln's body in the room on the morning of April 15th. So he died about 7:15-ish in the morning, about 7:20 actually, on the morning of April 15th, 1865. And then after he was pronounced, they brought in George Valentine Rutherford, Lieutenant Colonel George Valentine Rutherford, who the quartermaster are assigned to take possession and oversee funerals and custody of bodies in the military. And so this is what gets intriguing, is that George Valentine Rutherford had apparently, per the story of Margaret Hanks, obtained this copy of this image taken of Lincoln in that room at that moment. He then brought that copy with him back to Quincy, where he was neighbors and good friends with the Hanks. And then before George Valentine Rutherford moved out to California around 1870, where he was dying, he was going to come out to California to die of tuberculosis in a nicer climate. He handed the image over to the Hanks family, and then it passed from Joseph Hanks to his son Jacob Hanks, who then had only one daughter, Margaret Hanks, who died in 1986. And then from her possession, it passed into the hands of Larry Davis. And so that's where our kind of research began, was talking to Larry Davis and saying, okay, take us back through every detail that, Margaret Hanks told you, and let's try to put this all together. And there was a name that stuck out. And he said, well, the picture was taken by the Olkey brothers. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting about that is that the Olkey brothers, Henry and Julius Olkey, were the two photographers who rented the room directly above the room where Lincoln died. And that night that Lincoln was shot, they were basically conscripted into service and told, you're going to be orderlies tonight. You're going to run up and down the stairs. We're going to borrow the sheets off your bed. We're going to, you're going to get hot water bottles for us. So they were there. We know that there were two photographers, and we know they took at least underlined at least two other images of the empty room. So then that begs the question, if we know they had a camera already in the room, why wouldn't they have also just taken one of Lincoln still in the bed?
And that these photos were after the body had been removed, because there's still blood on the pillow, mm-hmm. and they also were hidden for a number of years, right?
Yeah, they don't show up until one shows up in the 60s in the purse of an old lady who was a cousin of the Olkeys. And then the other one shows up at auction in 1985 in New York. So yeah, these two images were kept secret. So again, it begs the question: is if you had a camera in that room, how many other images are there potentially out there that might have been taken during that window of time? And where are they? And are people out there sitting on them and just not aware?
Now, these photos that the two that were found in the 60s and 85, they were paper photos, though, right? They weren't ambrotype, were they?
Yeah, correct. They were paper prints. And so that was initially a point of contention or question for us is, why would there be different styles?
Right.
The difference being, I mean, this is not something I'm necessarily inherently qualified to speak about, but I'm paraphrasing what we learned from the experts who are qualified, such as, Mark Osterman and Franz Osterman, who are kind of the preeminent historians of the process of 19th century photography. And in ambrotype, the theory that Mark Osterman put into my mind was that I asked that question too while we were filming. And I said, but why? Why would you do the ambrotype? Because the ambrotype had kind of fallen a little bit out of fashion by 1865. Mm-hmm. It's kind of been replaced by the daguerreotype or the tintype, excuse me. But Mark made a really interesting point. He said, well, it's the fastest. It's the fastest technique. So if you were trying to get a picture kind of in secret on a time crunch, that would have been the fastest exposure time.
Right.
And so that started to make sense to me that okay, if you had the expertise to be able to take that type of picture, and you're a journalist, you're a photographer whose career it has been dependent on actually back in Europe, they were portraitists of dead monarchs. You would just use the fastest method and try to get that picture and capture that moment.
So why don't we do this? Because I want to take a second break here. When we come back, I want to talk more about how this photo came and how it all works out very well. Also, I want to play some stuff when we get back. Did I capture the voice of President Lincoln and Mrs. Mary Todd Lincoln in a Spirit Box session last week, getting ready for this show? I started off, I don't normally try to do this. I don't normally try to reach famous people because that seems a bit passé in some ways, because it's like that's what everyone wants to do. But knowing that I was going to have Dr. Whitny Braun on, and I'm so focused on this photo that I started off the show and I was just like, we're going to try to reach out to President Lincoln, and we're also going to try to reach out to Mary Todd Lincoln. And even before the show started, you kind of have to do your sort of just
get yourself ready for it, meditate a little bit. And when I asked that question before the show started, my flashlight was going off and answering the questions. Now, some people don't think that that's valid paranormal activity. I tend to, because it was working with my questions. And I was asking President Lincoln, could you please come through? And it would come in saying yes, asking if I could talk, if I have permission to talk to Mary Todd. Permission came through. So I'm going to play 3 clips here. And Patrick, I think maybe we play them twice in a row, if that works. And the first one is I had the image of that came to Dr. Braun's direction. I had it on screen, and I asked President Lincoln if this was him. Now, I normally you let people try to figure out what they say yourself. We don't have the time for that. I'm going to say I believe he said sure. So let's take a listen to that. That's Lincoln number 1, Patrick.
President Lincoln, I have one question for you. As you can see, I am looking at this right now. Could you please draw your attention to here? I would like to know if this is you. If it is you, could you just say yes, please?
Sure.
President Lincoln, I have one question for you. As you can see, I am looking at this right now. Could you please draw your attention to here? I would like to know if this is you. If it is you, could you just say yes, please?
Sure.
So, I mean, that's really interesting. I find that to be really interesting. And before I even said to people, my gosh, I think it said sure, my comment section was lighting up. Like, people heard it. They're just like, oh my gosh, wow. So the next one is, like I said, I wanted to get permission to talk to Mrs. Lincoln. I did not assume that I could, but I wanted to talk to her because we know that she was very much into speaking with spirits. So the next one is me asking to talk to Mrs. Lincoln, and what I believe at the end of this is a male saying Mary Todd. So let's play Mary Todd, Patrick.
Mr. President, is your wife here? Could we speak with your wife? Mr. President, is your wife here? Could we speak with your wife?
So, I mean, actually, it sounds like it could be female, but what the one that really got me, the one that I just think is absolutely incredible, is I bumble my way through, and I do mean bumble, because by the time the energy was big there, I didn't know what to really, I mean, it was just like I didn't know what was going on. It was just like, wow, this could really be them. So you're going to hear me ask Mary Todd Lincoln, you spoke with spirits, when you were alive. Now that you are a spirit, do you speak with the living? And that's an eloquent way of saying it compared to how you're going to hear it. And the what we get back is a woman saying, "Talk about what?" And that's pretty incredible. So, Patrick, let's do talk about what.
Mrs. Lincoln, you spent your entire life reaching out to spirits. Do you talk to other people? Do you talk to other people as a spirit, to other living people? Talk about what? Mrs. Lincoln, you spent your entire life reaching out to spirits. Do you talk to other people? Do you talk to other people as a spirit, to other living people? Talk about what?
So, and then don't ignore the fact that during that, a male says, "I'm out," which I don't know what that means. So, Dr. Braun, I guess what you got to learn from this is, why did you waste your money doing all this research when you could have just come to me, and I could have just turned on a spirit box and it would have been, there you go, it could have saved you. Could have saved you like a lot of time. It could have been a 5-minute documentary is what I'm saying here.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, I think that, we those of us who saw the image felt that we owed it to to history in the abstract sense of trying to get at the truth of this image and wanting to know, is this what it's purported to be? And so the only way that you can do that is really to mix the historical research with the science, and then you take the preponderance of evidence, and then you make the call. And I think the thing that I always try to point out is there's a lot of detractors, right? There are a lot of people who say that this picture just can't be, and they've got various reasons for saying that. And the thing that I always say in response is kind of borrowing from the philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche. I can't prove the existence of God, but I can't say God doesn't exist.
Right.
Right. I can't 100% say that this is Lincoln, but I can't prove that it's not. And so basically going into this research, there was nothing that told us this couldn't be. Mm-hmm. Right. So So there was a plausible explanation for the age and type of photographic method. There was a plausible explanation for why he looks the way he does in the picture. There's a plausible explanation for why the picture ended up in a steamer trunk in a hoarder's house in Quincy, Illinois. I mean, there's a plausible explanation for all these things. So we couldn't find anything that was like, a nail in the coffin, no pun intended, that said this can't be. So when you take all of this evidence, this preponderance of evidence, we can say, I can't prove that it is Lincoln, but I absolutely cannot prove that it's not. And so that's, that was just, it was sort of like a addiction trying to chase down the next piece of evidence, trying to say, hey, is there anything that would prove that this isn't correct? And in fact, it kind of went the other direction for us, where we kept actually finding more evidence that was in support than was against. And yeah, that was, and it was, and as much as it is flattering to have people say, ask me my opinion on the picture, it was really truly a team effort. I mean, it took an army of people to research this.
This photo had a lot of avenues to show that the provenance would fall apart. I mean, it could. The way it was in the documentary, it was literally like a house of cards. If one thing didn't work out, the entire thing would fall apart.
You are listening to the best of GhostBox Radio with Greg Bakun. Remember, you can hear full past episodes, see upcoming events, and order books of the authors we have on the show by going to GhostBoxRadio.com. Don't forget to like us over on Facebook, look us up at GhostBox Radio with Greg Bakun, and finally, please consider supporting me on Patreon. We have a special, unique audio content that you'll not find anywhere else, plus special episodes. On Patreon, you can find me as GhostBox Radio with Greg Bakun.